wow, 15 minutes ago this is an empty room, and this is great. So I've set my timer so I won't roll on. I can't guarantee I won't roll on, but when I see you start to be like my students and rolling your heads and stuff, then I'll know to wrap it up. The title of my talk, Celebrating Blackbeard, But Should We? I hope got some of you thinking, so what does he mean by that? Well, this year, 2018, is the 300th anniversary of Blackbeard's demise, we'll say. And the state of North Carolina is celebrating. It's Blackbeard 300, and they've got an exhibit that is traveling around the state. It's currently at Joyner Library on our ECU campus. But there's speakers such as myself going around giving talks, and on our campus we are doing a lot of things. I'll talk about that at the end, but everybody's really interested about Blackbeard, and as I was talking to Keith, he's probably the most famous person that we know almost nothing about. And you think you know about Blackbeard, but you really don't. But let's get at why are we even celebrating Blackbeard? Well, first of all, we love pirates. And who doesn't love pirates? I have loved pirates since I was 5. And I have to say, though, everything, and when I say pirates, you all have an image in your mind. It may be a little bit different, but it all goes back to Treasure Island. No matter what you've read since, no matter what else you've looked at on the History Channel or PBS or something like that, when someone says pirates, it goes back to Robert Louis Stevenson. 1883 was when this came out. And I remember when we had our first daughter, who just got married a week ago, I said, I'm going to read her some of the classics, and not the classic comics. I'm going to read the real books to her. So one of the things I thought, hey, when she was a little bit older, I said, well, read Treasure Island. And so I don't know if you've read the actual Robert Louis Stevenson edition, but it's kind of dark. And so I'm reading it, and people are being killed, and it's scary. And, you know, Kate wasn't liking it too much. So I ditched that and got the Disney version out. And then I sat down and reread it and said, wow, this is great stuff. It's still in print today. Peter Pan came about 20 years later. It was actually a syndicated set of short stories in a magazine that later J.M. Barrie put together in a book form. But and people from some of the characters from Treasure Island appear in Peter Pan. Then, of course, we get into the cinematic treatment of pirates. It's all downhill after Captain Blood. Errol Flynn, classic pirate. In fact, this Saturday on campus, Friday evening, we're having a movie marathon of pirate movies. And Captain Blood's going to be one of them, but there's a whole bunch. And they get more and more terrible after that. And then until Disney reinvents the pirate genre with Captain Jack Sparrow and what's not to like. I'm sure this Halloween we'll see a lot of Captain Jack Sparrow impersonators. So we like pirates. They're scary, but not so scary that when we tell pirate stories to our kids that we keep them up at night, unless you read the original. Don't do that. Trust me, when your grandchildren or whatever, read Treasure Planet or something, Muppet Treasure Island. That's a little better. We even have on September 19th, National Talk. Actually, it's International Talk Like a Pirate Day. And on days that I'm teaching, if I'm teaching on September 9th, I try and lecture in pirate talk. We'll be talking about pirates today. And it's exhausting. So I was glad I wasn't teaching this time. But I was at my desk a couple of September 19th ago, and the phone rings, and I go, this be Dr. Ewen, speak your piece or walk the plank. And it was this lawyer from Washington about a project that you want to talk to me about. It's a humorless bunch up there. So you got to be careful about this whole pirate thing. But we're getting, what we all think about pirates. And there are mascots. Yeah, go Pirates. If he hadn't dropped the ball, it would have been a different game. I was there last time, but and PD's there. We've got a couple of PDs, and there are pirates. But you know something? It's all fun and games. Oh, well, of course, you know, who doesn't love pirates? You know, doesn't. I saw this on campus when I was walking by, and I said, I've got to make a slide of this. So, but we had a couple Halloweens ago in one of the student housing projects. We had a riot break out. And I mean, they were rocking buses, climbing phone poles. Police came from everywhere. And it was all over the news. And the chancellor at the time, Steve Ballard, was being interviewed. And he goes, "This is not how pirates behave." And I'm thinking to myself, are you kidding me? This is exactly how pirates behave, you know? So, and then here's my introduction. I got this album when I was 5. William Bendix sings and tells famous pirate stories. I loved it when I was 5. I rediscovered it when I was in grad school. I was home visiting, and I said, wow, this is... So I played it at a grad school party, and with enough grog, it's as great when you're older as it was when I was 5. So I've still got it, and I've transitioned it onto CD, and and you've got William Bendix and the whole pirate package. He's got a peg leg and an eye patch. Doesn't have a hook. I don't know how he forgot that. But what we all see, once again, all back to Treasure Island. And the stories that he tells, Blackbeard, Henry Morgan, Jean Lafitte, Captain Kidd, I have come to actually, in my first pirate book, X Marks the Spot, we have something about each one of these archaeological sites associated with each one of these. And I got to tell you, the stories that he told have no bearing to what actually happened. But they're both good. And of course, there's the romance of buried treasure. I have to tell you, though, no pirate, there is no historically recorded event of any pirate burying their treasure. There was one, and it was Captain Kidd, but he went back and got it. So I don't think that really counts. But that has not stopped anyone from looking for it. Blackbeard supposedly spent some time at Plum Point at Bath, North Carolina. And if you ever walk back, it's on Weyerhaeuser land. I got permission to get back there one time to survey some. And man, there are potholes everywhere where people have looked for Blackbeard's treasure. The deal is with pirates is that they spent it as fast as they stole it. And so they're not, who would bury things like that? I've been fascinated with Oak Island and the Curse of Oak Island, which I'm not even sure it's still on anymore. But it starts off looking for pirate treasure in the Money Pit. I remember when I was in high school, I read in Reader's Digest a story about the Money Pit. And let me give you some statistics about the Money Pit. Millions of dollars, 6 people died while looking. It's like a big kind of hole in, and this is off Nova Scotia. They actually, the owner of the island, built this causeway so he could get heavy equipment over so he could dig in the Money Pit. They haven't found anything, despite all the money. In fact, in the Curse of Oak Island, if you've watched that, oh, look, they're pulling stuff out of there. What they're pulling out of the Money Pit now are previous scaffolds and things that people from 50 years ago had put down in there to get at it. But it's not stopping anyone. And we're past pirate treasure now anyways. We're on to the Knights Templar, the Holy Grail, pieces of the True Cross. It's all down there. How it gets there, don't even bother to ask. But if we're going to really talk about pirates, we got to talk about historically what they really were. And pirates are synonymous with terrorists. I mean, they worked at it. They wanted to scare the hell out of you. So when they sailed up and they had their black flag with a skull and crossbones on it, and that's, I have to say, the ones that they've associated with different pirates, and one of the first ones I showed you is supposed to be Blackbeard's flag. We really don't know. We really don't know, but why not? But we know they had the Jolly Roger or a red flag, but it was to tell you that this was a bad guy and that you should just get up. Just give them what they want and maybe they'll let you go. That was the whole point, because they didn't want to sink your boat. It was full of stuff they wanted. They didn't want to fight you. They might lose some of their own people. They wanted to scare the hell out of you so that you would give them everything. And it seemed to work. Blackbeard, we'll talk a little bit about him, but he had a good PR person getting his name out there. But the deal with piracy is that no one was safe from attack. 1690 to 1720, that's often called the golden age of piracy, if there is such a thing. But that's what historians have termed it. And during that period, mostly in the Caribbean, but a little bit in the Indian Ocean as well, 3,000 ships are taken. 3,000. That's a lot today. Back then, this is catastrophic. And that's why piracy convictions carried an instant death sentence. In fact, they didn't just kill you. Then they took your body in some cases, put tar all over it, put you in a cage, hung you out in front of the harbor so that anyone else sailing in saying, this is what we do to pirates. So you might want to rethink this whole idea if that's where you go. And piracy really only gets suppressed when you have strong governments with a navy that can put things down. And that wasn't the New World in the late 17th, early 18th century. The new colonies were struggling, and England and France and were over on the other side of the Atlantic, so that's why piracy really takes off. In fact, something to think about, one thing that the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise gets right is, who are the bad guys in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies? British. Yeah, it's the British, but which British? It's not the Navy. It's the...
Isn't like the Royal British Navy?
They're the pawns of the really bad guys, the East India Company. It's those bad business people, you know, but... And for pirates, they were the bad guys because it's the businessmen that would go to the governments and say, you know something? This is hurting my bottom line here, these pirates. And the more I lose in trade, the more you lose in taxes. And that gets the government's attention. They go, yeah, you're right, we got to stomp out these bad pirates. And that's what finally puts the kibosh on piracy in the New World, is the British and French navies decide, no, they're cutting into our trade. So let's kind of look at piracy then. Now, if you really want to know, I mean, we've got this romantic idea of what piracy was like during the Golden Age. Bartholomew Roberts, Black Bart, said, a short life but a merry one for me. And that's how he characterized piracy. But I beg to differ. Here you can see, this is Howard Pyle, my favorite pirate artist. Pirates sneaking up on a galleon, and a lot of pirate attacks were this way. They'd have a larger ship that they would sail out from, and they would board ships and take them. What does that sound like? Well, it sounds like Somalia, where they come up in these Zodiac rafts and with tankers or container ships or something like that, and they would do the same sort of thing. So today, in the Horn of Africa, around Somalia, the International Chamber of Commerce reports 5,000 pirate attacks since 1992. Actually, it's probably closer to 6,000 now, with an annual loss of $15 billion. Starting to talk some real money now. Off the coast of Somalia, 179 ships were captured between 2005 and 2012. Most were ransomed. You know, they didn't take anything off it. They held on to it and said, okay, you know, we've attacked your ship here, we've captured it, give us a bunch of money and you can have it back. And I used to wonder, you know, why don't they just put some armed guys on here, or, you know, mount some guns, or have the U.S. Navy? Well, first of all, it's outside our waters. Second of all, it's expensive to arm and maintain armed ships. It's actually cheaper for a lot of these companies just to ransom off their, you know, buy their ships back from these guys, hoping that they don't lose many, you know, and that's why, well, you've got some water cannons anyways, might as well see if that drives them off. And so it's interesting, but it's still tough. The average pirate, and, you know, why do they do this in Somalia? It's a miserable life. The average pirate makes maybe $30,000 a year, which is 54 times the typical annual income of a Somali. They don't do well over there. And they have short lives, and they're not particularly merry. So if you want to really think of what pirates during the time we think about were like, think about these guys. They were terrorists, and they were a miserable lot. So, with that in mind, maybe we need a new mascot. I'll tell you how this one came about. I teach a class, in fact, I'm teaching it this semester, Caribbean archaeology, and I had a football player, Ty Holmes, in the class, and he sat in the back, and I gave this very lecture, and I said, maybe we need a new mascot. I see his pencil moving and stuff, and I thought, I have reached Ty. He's listened to me. I finally connected with him. Maybe I'll get him through this class after all. And he comes up to me after class. He goes, Dr. Ewen, I've got our new mascot. I was afraid of what it was going to be, but this is okay. I like that. So, but think about that. What if we were the ECU terrorists? ESPN's head would explode. I just know that. So it's kind of, and now that we've all got that, so we know how politically incorrect celebrating Blackbeard is. So what do we talk about when, this is something that bothered us briefly in those of us who do academic studies. This was a headline in the Charlotte Observer. He maimed, killed, and plundered. And this was because they were putting Blackbeard's flag on the ferry between, I think it was between Swan Quarter and Ocracoke. And they thought, this is terrible. They can't be flying the pirate flag. But actually, when you read the story, and they get over it, it's like, well, yeah, it's kind of ironic, but it's still a neat flag. So I thought, well, how can we celebrate Blackbeard? And do it not tongue-in-cheek, but really do it. Well, we can investigate the man. Blackbeard is the most famous person, as I started to say, that you know nothing about. What's his name? Edward Teach. No, it isn't. Is it Edward Thatch, maybe? Perhaps it's Edward Drummond. Perhaps it's Edward Beard. All of those have appeared in the historical record. Which one is, we get our well, let me ask this question. Where is he from? Bristol, England. Why do we know that? Nah. All right, fair enough. Bristol, England. There is a book, I want to get the title here, by Charles Johnson, General History of the Robberies and Murders of the Most Notorious Pirates, written in 1724, and has a whole bunch of different pirates, with Blackbeard's one of them. And that is where we get all of our information about Blackbeard. The only problem is, we don't know who Charles Johnson is. It's a pseudonym. So I'm always a little suspicious, if we don't know the author. Someone has, it has been suggested, actually the Library of Congress likes this, is that it was Daniel Defoe, the guy that wrote Robinson Crusoe. But now historians have settled on it was this Jacobean pamphleteer, Nathaniel Mist, kind of revving up popular opinion against pirates by exaggerating their depredations. And this is from one of the early editions, I think it's one of the first editions of A General History of Pirates. And so he has him a Bristol man born and bred. Okay. However, there's a local historian, Kevin Duffus, who's done some research, and he's come up and said, I have read another earlier amateur historian, a guy named John Oden from Bath, who's done research that said the Beard family lived across Bath Creek during the 18th century, and I think their son Edward was Blackbeard, Edward Blackbeard, and that when he came back to North Carolina in 1718 to get the king's pardon after running his ship aground in Beaufort Inlet, he was coming home. And he's got some interesting things. Some of Blackbeard's crew, the names of those crew appear in some of the local records in Bath on the vestries. And then to really roil the waters, I had a student, Bayless Brooks, who for his master's thesis did some research, genealogical research, and he's giving a talk actually on campus this Saturday, and his research indicates that Blackbeard was from Jamaica and that his father was a British naval officer. And in fact, Blackbeard himself was a naval in the British Navy for a while. So we don't know a lot about him. Which one of these is true? Well, you should read all the stuff and be as confused as I am about that. But I'm an informed, confused person. So that makes it a little different. So we can celebrate Blackbeard by trying to figure out who the heck he was. And this business about did he really tie match cords in his hair and put it under his hat and ribbons on his beard and braces of pistols. I think this is hilarious. He's standing there with his hair smoking and stuff, and people just kind of walking back and forth behind that. Kind of like that guy during the hurricane from the Weather Channel holding on while people are strolling along behind him, you know. So the whole idea, though, and probably why Charles Johnson did this, was to really amp up how scary Blackbeard was. Blackbeard had been dead for 6 years when that book was written. The interesting thing is, we don't see Blackbeard really in the historical record until 1716. He was a privateer sailing with Benjamin Hornigold, and then after hostilities cease, he not done robbing ships, so he just becomes a pirate. It's a lot easier to be a pirate than a privateer. When you were a privateer, you had to have a license, you had to attack only enemy shipping, and you had to share what you got with the government. When you're a pirate, you can attack anyone and you get to keep it all. Of course, you get killed, you know, pretty quickly. So we can celebrate Blackbeard by trying to learn a little bit more about him. We can celebrate his death. Interesting thing about Blackbeard is who actually gets him killed? Not the North Carolinians. It was Virginia. It was Governor Spotswood, whose political star wasn't doing so well. And another thing is that the Virginia shipping and the South Carolina shipping were what was being attacked, not the North Carolina shipping so much. That's because we don't have any decent ports here. The Outer Banks that we love were death to commerce. You know, you can sail right into Norfolk or Charleston, but you can't just sail into North Carolina, maybe up the Cape Fear a little bit, but it's tricky, and that's why it's the graveyard of the Atlantic. So when a pirate sails in and he has a whole bunch of stuff that he can sell at cheap prices, we're in, you know. That's kind of, I think, why we love pirates. And so Spotswood commissions a couple of naval vessels to actually go after Blackbeard. And Kevin Duffus, that historian I told you about, he this past weekend had Blackbeard on trial. And it wasn't so much Blackbeard on trial, was Governor Spotswood illegally goes after Blackbeard. Was Blackbeard a pirate? Oh, well, heck yes, he was. But that didn't make what Spotswood did any more illegal, sailing into another colony's waters to get that. And you know, Blackbeard, interesting, he was killed, his head cut off, and his body thrown overboard, which swam 5 or 7 times around the boat, depending on which story you like. His skull then kind of, after they get to Norfolk, it disappears, and an author, Judge Wedby, writes this story about how he was on Ocracoke one time, and he was inducted into this society where you drank rum out of the silver-lined skull of Blackbeard. And I always, when I give my talks, I always say, if any of you are members, I want in. See me afterwards, you know. So we can celebrate his death, and that's a good thing. He was a bad guy. You know, we don't even have to feel bad saying, yay, he's dead. And I'm an archaeologist, so let's talk about some material culture. We can talk about his ship. he takes the Queen Anne's Revenge was actually Le Concorde, which Blackbeard captures in early 1718 in the Lesser Antilles. It was a slaver. It starts out as a privateer ship, but then it turns into a slave ship. And on its third slaving voyage from Africa, it's in the Lesser Antilles, the small islands at the end of the Caribbean chain, and Blackbeard takes it. Slave ships make great pirate ships. They're fast and they're roomy. You can fill them full of stuff. And the first thing he does is he stuffs it full of cannons. It said he put 40 cannon on it. The wreck that we've worked on has yielded a little over 30 cannons, but we can talk about, okay, is that ship that we found, is that Blackbeard ship? How would we even know? We can talk about doing the archaeology. There's me and a sounding weight that came off the bottom, but the archaeology, I'm a land archaeologist for the most part. I've done some underwater archaeology, but I like to know where my next breath is coming from. And not only that, but the underwater archaeology that I liked was in the Florida Keys where I could see what I was doing. On the Queen Anne's Revenge, or the Beaufort Inlet wreck, as we should call it, that's a good day, you know, and if we were on the wreck right now, you wouldn't see me. You would all be kind of misty things to me there. So working in that turbid environment and then trying to get big things like this anchor. This was an all-day job, hooking lift balloons to it, getting it, breaking it free from the sea bottom, getting it almost to the top, then rigging it so that when you pulled it out, you didn't snap it in half and go, oh darn, what have we done? And then it goes to the conservation lab, which is on our West Research Campus in Greenville. And it's still being worked on. To get that in good shape to go and be ready for a museum, that's going to take probably close to 10 years. And you go, what? How can that be? All the things that go on the ocean floor that are iron get encrusted with this sort of lime cement type of stuff, and other things are stuck to it in shells and all kinds of barnacle-like things. And plus they're suffused with seawater. So you've got to get all the salt out. If it dries out and there's still salt in it, the salt crystallizes inside the metal and it pops it apart, and you don't want that. So you have to keep soaking it and changing the water and soaking it. And then you have to be very careful with these little air scribes to get the concretion off. And then you've got to hook it to an electrolysis rig and run a current through it to reconsolidate the good metal. It's a tedious thing, but the results are well worth it. So one of the questions, which the press, oddly enough, didn't answer or didn't even bother to ask at the beginning, was they all kind of ran with the idea that this was possible. And the state was very careful. The ship was found by treasure hunters who were looking for a Spanish treasure ship, and they found this. Figured out from historical records it might be Blackbeard's ship, but they knew there wouldn't be anything on it. Blackbeard runs it aground in 1718. And so they did some preliminary research, thought that's what it was. The newspapers loved it. The state takes over and says, okay, you know, we gave you the permit. You're not going to do any more excavation on it, but we think this is historically important, so we're going to do this work. And they do. And then a couple colleagues of mine in the Maritime Studies program go, you know, not so fast. This might not be the Queen Anne's Revenge. And that's when the press goes, what? What? You've lied to us. And I was getting phone calls, and I said, well, no, we said it was believed to be. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you weasel. You know, it's like, you're not a weasel. Come on. So I'll ask you this. How do we know, or I published an article with the project director who was a student of mine. How can I say that I think this is the Queen Anne's Revenge? What about it makes it the Queen Anne's Revenge?
Color, maybe?
The what?
Color, like the color of the boat.
Ah, but see, the wood's all gone. all that's left are a pile of ballast and concreted cannon and artifacts. So, but someone said something about the artifacts? What makes it a pirate artifact as opposed?
There's some inventory, some reported inventory that.
Yeah, wouldn't that be great?
Crown jewel or whatever.
Yeah, that'd have been fantastic. Yeah, but we don't have that.
Ship's bell.
Ship's bell, you know, and everybody, and we have 2 bells from this wreck, but neither one of them have a name on it, you know. Concord, Queen Anne's Revenge, either one I'd be good with. Well, let's take a couple of looks. First of all, is it in the right place? It ran aground. It didn't sink. I mean, it runs aground. And Beaufort wasn't much of a town, but it does kind of make it into the papers. And so we have an idea. We actually, Blackbeard, when he runs the boat aground, takes the ship of one of his other captains, Stede Bonnet, maroons Bonnet until he can finally get another ship. But at the trial of Blackbeard's people, they find out more information about this. So we have a pretty good idea of where it sank. And this isn't about the right place, but there's a bunch of wrecks all along that area. So it's got to be in the right place. It's got the artifacts. We don't have necessarily the exact kind of artifacts, but they can't date till later than 1718. If they do, they can't be from the Queen Anne's Revenge. So, got to have the right period artifacts. Artifacts unique to the voyage. Are there any things that pirates would have that other naval vessels or merchant vessels wouldn't have? I don't know, peg legs, cask of spare hooks or something like that. We're going to see there are going to be some different things that might go with us, but even so. But here's the main thing, large, heavily. According to all the harbor records in Beaufort, there's nothing that even approached. The ship would fit in Doughty Ficklin Stadium, but with not a lot of extra room. It was a big ship, and it was heavily armed. And there are a lot of cannons with this wreck, and it's a big ship. And so I'm not saying it couldn't be anything else, but there are no other large, heavily armed ships that were recorded going in at that time. And I don't know what that is. This has been annoying me. I'm going to see if I can get rid of it. Will that get rid of it? Hey, why not? Let's try it. Oh, that was a mistake. All right. All right. Yeah. What's that? Coins? If they're the right time period, but there are bits of coins, but there are no whole coins that we've found.
No whole coins with no whole dates.
No. No, but the coins that we have found, the pieces of coins, because they would cut coins into fragments, pieces of 8, it's a real thing, and they were more. They would cut them into like pie-shaped quarters, and it was the way. That's how you made change, kind of back then. This really says assemblage compared to other pirate vessels. You know, are the artifacts that we're finding on that like other pirate ships? Well, there's really only one other. There's a couple of other pirate ships, but only one other contemporary one nearby. That is the Witta, which sank off Cape Cod. And one of the things we found interesting, first of all, up in the forecastle where the crew was, you're finding nice stuff, which wouldn't be with your honest sailor because they're not well off, whereas your pirates are all stealing things, and so they have things that maybe they shouldn't have. Then you have the cannons. Several of the cannons from this wreck are loaded. They were sailing around with loaded cannons. Several of the cannons with the Witta in Cape Cod were loaded. And but merchant ships, naval vessels, they didn't do that. They would load them when they needed them, but the pirates, I guess they needed them all the time. So that's another kind of interesting thing. I had a student do her master's thesis on a pattern of the artifacts, and that sort of was one of the things that she was looking at. We could tell stories about some of the artifacts. Shackles, there are about 6 or 7 shackles now. Remember, this was a slave ship, so we go, ha-ha, that's a good tie-in. Well, maybe. All ships had shackles. All ships had naughty people. I bet pirate ships had a lot of naughty people on them, and sometimes you needed to lock them up. And what you would do is your hand would come through here, there would be a bar across there, and then it would lock on, and so you would have your hands with a bar across there with these things. This is rope that was preserved because it's in contact with the iron. And so we actually do have some fiber that, and you think, oh, that's nice, they made it comfy for them. No, that's so it fits snugger. You know, they weren't really caring how comfortable your shackle was. Heavily armed, man, not only were there a lot of cannons, but the tens of thousands of pieces of shot. This is a grenade, and it was filled with gunpowder and had a fuse here, and you would light it and try and figure out how fast it was burning, and then you would throw it over. And so we've got a number of grenades from this wreck. This is a urethral syringe. One of the things that Blackbeard did when he besieged Charleston Harbor was he demanded a chest of medicine. And this was for the treatment of venereal disease. You would fill this with mercury, and there is residue mercury in this, and then you would apply it to the affected part. I don't know if it worked, but you know, it was just, yeesh. So was this one of the captured medicinal objects from Charleston? Maybe, or maybe they just had that on there, but it seems to fit in with the whole pattern. A lot of liquor bottles. All ships had a lot of liquor bottles because the water went bad so quickly, and you would often mix. That's what a grog was. It was water mixed with rum or brandy in this case. So we have a lot of that. A really interesting artifact was just found, and this was a piece of paper that was still, it was found at the back end of a breech block for a cannon. And the work I'm second to none in my admiration of the researchers at the Queen Anne's Revenge Conservation Lab. They took this, figured out the letters. This one was a clue hilo, and they went in and they were able to find the book that it was from. And here you can see the page with that, and it was from the right time period. It was about Woodes Rogers, who was a famous pirate hunter. Maybe that angered them and they tore it off and used it as wadding in a gun. But all the artifacts have great stories about them. Nearly all of them are from the right time period. And I say nearly all of them because here, this was the most controversial. This is one of my colleagues published on this. This is C3, cannon, the third cannon found. And scratched on the top was a 1, a 7, a 3, and is that a 0? If it is, it's 1730. Yeah, that can't be Blackbeard then. It turns out that this probably isn't a date. First of all, who scratches a date on a cannon? Second, so if it's not a date, what is it? It's the weight of the cannon in hundredweights. It's a way of measuring large, heavy items. Why would you put the weight on a cannon? Well, a lot of cannons were sold by the pound, so you would want to know how heavy it was. Also, if you're mounting cannons on your ship, you want the same weight on either side. And actually, I've been told that a couple more cannons that have been brought up also have the weights scratched on them. So this was initially a terrible controversy, but now not so much. And then it's in 20 feet of water. How do you run aground in 20 feet of water? That was another big thing. We got geomorphologists involved, and it turns out the inlet into Beaufort moves around a lot. At least it used to. The Corps of Engineers has told it can't do that anymore, and you have to go in at a certain way. Blackbeard's ship runs aground probably in about 8 feet of water, and then over the time storms and stuff have scoured out the sediments, and it settles down, and now it's on solid substrate. So the next few hurricanes that come through, we're going to start losing stuff. We've excavated about half of it, a little more than half of it, but there's still more to be done on that if they get the funding. And then I want to kind of end up by talking about the partnership between the state and East Carolina University. You think, well, we're all the state. Don't we work harmoniously together? I am the liaison between the anthropology department representing ECU and the North Carolina Division of Natural and Cultural Resources. And just getting these guys parking passes is an experience, you know? And I was like, holy moly. I think I finally figured out a way to really expedite things, but it's taken a couple of years. They have their way of doing things. We have our ways. We have provided the space and some of the equipment, and a lot of students. I've had 6 students do their master's thesis on material from the Queen Anne's Revenge. One do his doctorate on it. Another one, who I just met with today, I hope she will finish up this semester. It is great for the students, and I think it's a good thing for the state too. We provide facilities that they just haven't had before, and so it's, I think both sides realize it's a great thing, and despite that, it's really working together. And so, and the lab, I should put, what are we doing? How are we celebrating? How on campus? Well, we've got a number of things. First of all, if you want to see some of the artifacts from the Queen Anne's Revenge, on the 2nd floor of Joyner Library on campus, we have the traveling exhibit, and it'll be there through the end of November. We just had one of the cannons in the homecoming parade last Saturday, and then we had it out at the football game, and that was great. I got to go out on the field, and I didn't get to talk about it, but I got to wave and be on the Jumbotron, so it's off my bucket list now. So the 25th, this Thursday, Angus Constam from Scotland, who is a pirate historian. He's written several books on piracy, including one about Blackbeard. He will be coming, giving our lecture on the Voyages of Discovery lecture. If you guys get the opportunity, I mean, just listening to his Scottish brogue is great. So he's coming. And then this Saturday, we're having a symposium on campus in the new Science and Technology building, where I'm going to have Bayless Brook talk about why he thinks Blackbeard's from Jamaica. I'm going to have David Moore, who was one of the archaeologists on the project, he's 20 years before the mast, you know, doing archaeology on the Queen Anne's Revenge, and Kim Kenyon, who's a head conservator, going to talk about how they take care of all the stuff that's come up. And then Angus is going to come and say a few words after that. So that's my story. If you have any questions about Blackbeard or his stuff, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you so much. Pretty much, you know, and in fact, when I'm asked about that, you know, when are you going to say it? Sometimes there's no smoking blunderbuss or something like that, but it's a right ship. I mean, it's the right size, right time, right place. And sometimes in archaeology, that's about as good as it gets. I think we've gone to its, in fact, the project director was a student of mine. He and I co-authored an article calling Beyond Reasonable Doubt. And it's our working hypothesis, and it's the best candidate. So I'm comfortable saying, yeah, I think it's the Queen Anne's Revenge. So, yeah?
Got my master's in history in 2009 at ECU, and came in contact with lots of maritime history folks. What are they doing on this project?
Well, interesting. They send some of their graduate students over on it, but it's really more of a state project, but we're trying to, they're a little competitive, although although their students have actually been hired to work on the whole thing. And that's one of the things that's made it so challenging. Who's in charge of this whole thing? It's on ECU's property, but the state is funding everything. So this partnership is, I think, really taken hold over the years now. In fact, we just had a meeting with the state archaeologist and the head of the Maritime Studies program, the new head of the Maritime Studies program. He's totally on board. And so I just see better and better stuff in the future. Yeah?
Was Blackbeard considered educated?
As much as we know about him, depending on who we want to believe, I would say probably, especially if it's, as Bayless Brooks says, that he was, you know, a naval officer. He certainly appears to have had some education. And one of the things, I'm glad you kind of brought that up, is one of the things that comes up about piracy is that they were the first democracy in the New World. I think that gets overblown, and some of the things we saw in the Pirates of the Caribbean, where you could just stop people and say parlay, and they go, oh damn, you know, okay, we'll have to discuss. No, 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 no. And they elected their leaders. I wouldn't say it was really an election per se. You followed whoever was the person that you thought could get the most loot for you. And Blackbeard, by virtue of his personality and his cunning and his abilities, you know, commanded a following. Someone like Stede Bonnet, I apologize if you're a big Stede Bonnet fan. He's from Southport, but I mean, he bought his pirate ship. What pirate does that? And then he hires a crew and goes out. He's supposedly leaving a nagging wife, and you know, it's and he comes to a bad end. He gets hung at the end. And he was always kind of sailing along with Blackbeard until Blackbeard needed his ship, and then he'd take it from him. And oh, I'm sorry, okay, you know. Did he have any formal schooling? I don't know. I don't know if any of us know until we figure out exactly who he was. But it wouldn't surprise me if he could read and write and certainly knew how to navigate. Yeah?
You have anybody in North Carolina that claims kinship to him?
Everybody. That's a funny story. When I moved here, we had our second daughter, and I go to St. Paul's Episcopal Church, and the rector at that time was Tom Midget, and he goes, so I was seeing about getting Madeline baptized, and he goes, you know, my great-great-great-grandfather was Blackbeard. And I went, and I'm thinking, and this goes back to this whole terrorist thing, I'm going, and you're okay with that, you know? Why are you telling me my priest is a notorious pirate fan? And it's also interesting, well, what about, didn't he have his 14th wife marry Ormond in Bath? And one of the interesting things is when you really look at the records that deal with Blackbeard, if we can put him in Bath for more than 2 weeks, it's not much more than that. And so, and in fact, the interesting thing is while he's there, supposedly he gets married again, but we have no idea how many times before that. I think it was Charles Johnson said he took his 14th wife there, and okay. But the interesting thing is he gets the king's pardon, and what the king's pardon is all about is one of the ways to fight piracy in an area where you don't have a lot of naval presence is you say, okay, it's amnesty. If you guys agree to quit being pirates, we'll just forgive all your past indiscretions. And a lot of people did that. And Blackbeard does that. He goes to Bath, where Governor Eden is set up, and he gets the king's pardon. He applies for it. And then, while he's there, he sails out past the Sound, and he finds an abandoned French merchant vessel, just floating out there, full of stuff, but nobody on it. And he brings it back, and he says, I found this ship. And Eden goes, well, imagine that. Well, I guess you can sell it all, and we'll split the proceeds. And they go, oh, God, good price. Everybody was a winner except whoever was on that ship first. So are people related to him? If you're a fan of Kevin Duffus's idea and thought that he was Edward Beard coming home, there are a lot of people there that may be related to him. A skeleton that was recovered in Bath of presumably Edward Salter, perhaps Edward Salter, that's what Kevin thinks it was. The Cooper on Blackbeard's ship was Edward Salter, and there's a whole bunch of Salter kin that have shown up and claiming that they're related to at least some of Blackbeard's crew. So the claims, and maybe family lore that go all the way back, and I'm going to stay out of that. If your family swears that they're related to Blackbeard and you believe it, I'm not going to question it because I can't disprove it. Yes?
How long can you work all year on the wreck, or is there a limited time frame that you got to do this?
It's limited by funding, basically. There is no more expensive way to do archaeology than underwater archaeology. And if you're using students on the project, then, you know, a lot of times they're in school. The summer is good, except it isn't when you're working around in August and stuff, because there are all these storms roll in. So times that they've had a project, sometimes they can only work half the time. Funding is pretty much run out for now. They've got enough to keep the lab going, but they are trying to get enough to go back out and get the main pile in the middle is still there. And like I said, 40% of it's still down there and needs to come up.
They did take the buoy out, didn't they?
As far as I know, it's not there. If you stand on the beach in front of Fort Macon and know where to look, and the buoy was never right over it, but the Coast Guard has a tower there, and they've got a camera pointed right at where it is. And if you take a boat and hang around too long in front of that, then they send out a boat to say, move along, nothing to see here. And anyways. Okay, well, thank you so much.